10 tanks. 10 completely different answers to the same question. How do you win a ground war? Some of them got it right. Some of them got men killed by the thousands, because the people who designed them never had to sit inside one. This list covers machines from the bottom of the barrel all the way up to the tank that arguably decided the war on the Eastern Front. And I'll tell you right now, at least 2 of these rankings are going to make you argue with your screen. Good. That means we're doing this right. The Death Trap on Wheels Fiat L3 35. Picture this. It's 1940, and you're an Italian tanker somewhere in the western desert. The enemy is 400 yards out. Between you and their guns sits 13.5 millimeters of flat, unsloped steel. Not angled, not layered, flat. And a British infantryman with a boy's anti-tank rifle, a weapon he carries on his shoulder like a hunting rifle, punches straight through it. The L335 wasn't really a tank. It was a 2-man trackette that Italy sent into combat against British cruiser tanks and Matildas, and the gap between what it was built for and what it actually faced cost Italian tankers their lives in numbers that should have ended the program early. In Ethiopia and Spain in the mid-1930s, it worked fine. Light, fast, cheap, useful for policing fights against infantry with no armor at all. But that war and World War II were completely different things. The armament was twin 8mm machine guns. No anti-tank capability whatsoever. It brought a pistol to a tank fight. And by 1940 and 1941 in North Africa, British forces were capturing L335s faster than Italy could replace them. The deeper problem was doctrine. Italian commanders treated it as infantry support, which might have been defensible if the infantry had something that could stop enemy armor. They didn't, so the L335 became the frontline tank by default. Italy's army was still fielding these in meaningful numbers in 1940. The hardware's never the whole story. Sometimes it's just the most visible symptom of everything that's already broken. Fast, light, and running out of war. Type 95 Hago. At Guadalcanal in 1942, Marines stopped the Type 95 Hago with 37mm guns, then with .50 caliber machine guns. Then at Guam, a Jeep stopped one. That's not a joke. That's a primary source, and it tells you everything about where this tank ended up. In 1937, against Chinese infantry with almost no anti-armor capability, the Hago actually worked. Over 2,300 built, decent reliability, a 37mm gun that could handle what it faced, and suspension good enough to keep moving through jungle terrain where other light tanks bogged down. In that context, it earned its place, but Japan's war expanded and the Hago didn't. The armor stayed at 12mm, barely thicker than the L335 we just left behind, and the 37mm gun couldn't penetrate a Sherman from any angle at any range. Not from the side, not from the rear, nowhere. At Saipan in 1944, Japanese commanders sent Hago tanks in a night charge against dug-in Marines backed by Shermans. The 37mm rounds bounced off Sherman frontal armor. The Sherman's 75mm rounds didn't bounce off anything. Japan never built a medium tank to replace it. Partly steel shortages, partly because the Navy consumed the industrial budget, partly because the Army and Navy couldn't agree on who got what, so the Hago kept shipping out because nothing else existed to send. The crews knew the math going in. The wrong answer to the right question, M3 Lee. British tankers in North Africa called it the thing that has a gun in its cheek. Not a compliment, but those same crews said it saved them in 1942 when nothing else could, and both things are completely true. The M3 Lee exists because American engineers couldn't mount a 75mm gun in a fully rotating turret fast enough. The turret technology wasn't ready. The war wasn't waiting, so they bolted the 75mm into the hull at a fixed angle and dropped a smaller 37mm gun in the turret on top. Everyone knew it was a compromise before the first one rolled off the line. That hull-mounted gun meant the whole tank had to rotate to aim its main weapon, which made it slow to engage, easy to spot, and tactically awkward in ways that got crews killed. The silhouette ran almost 10 feet tall. German gunners loved seeing it come over a ridge. But at Gazala and El Alamein in 1942, that 75mm was knocking out Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs at combat range, something British Crusaders and Valentines simply couldn't do. Soviet crews who received over 1,300 through Lend-Lease called it a grave for 7 brothers, which tells you exactly what they thought about surviving inside one. They took it anyway, because the alternative was fighting Panzer IIIs in T-60 light tanks. Over 6,000 built reliable components, a right radial engine that mechanics already understood. It showed up and it worked. The right gun in the wrong machine. The workhorse that peaked too early. Panzer III. France, 1940. You're a Panzer III commander rolling through the Ardennes, and your radio works. Your crew of 3 means you're actually commanding instead of loading shells, and the French tanks you're up against have one-man turrets, where the commander loads, aims, fires, and tries to figure out where the enemy is all at the same time. That coordination gap, not your armor or your gun, wins that campaign. The Panzer III started with a 37mm gun and 30mm of armor, then grew into a 50mm gun and 50mm of armor across later variants. Each upgrade bought relevance, but the Eastern Front exposed the ceiling fast because the 50mm gun bounced off T-34 sloped armor at medium range and did essentially nothing to a KV-1 at any range. Germany's answer was more upgrades. The Ausf-J got a longer 50mm gun, the Ausf. L got extra armor bolted to the front, and the hull kept getting heavier without getting meaningfully better protected. About 5,700 Panzer IIIs were built across all variants, spread across too many upgrade cycles on a platform that should have been retired earlier. By late 1942, Panzer III units were getting pushed into infantry support and reconnaissance because the Panzer IV with the long 75mm had taken the main battle role. The crews who'd built their whole fighting method around it were now driving a machine that couldn't reliably kill what it met. Built to absorb punishment and not much else. Churchill tank. Dieppe, August 1942. 29 Churchill tanks hit that beach, and most of them never cleared the seawall. The ones that did got destroyed. Every after-action report pointed at the same machine as the problem. And yet by 1945, Churchill crews were crossing the Rhine while men in faster, better-armed tanks were dying around them. Same tank. Completely different war. The Churchill was designed for one specific nightmare: slow, grinding, infantry support fighting, the kind that chewed through World War I. Thick armor, low speed, built to cross broken ground while infantry moved alongside. The early versions didn't deliver on that promise though. The Bedford engine was underpowered, the transmission kept failing, and the first models carried a 2-pounder gun that couldn't kill a Panzer IV from the front at combat range. Slow, unreliable, and underarmed. The Churchill Mark VII carried 152mm of frontal steel. A Tiger I had 100mm. The Tiger's 88mm gun, the weapon that defined what German anti-tank capability looked like, couldn't reliably punch through a Churchill Mark VII's front at typical combat ranges. German gunners stopped aiming at the hull and went for the tracks instead. That tells you everything. Italy from 1943 onward gave the Churchill the war it had been waiting for: steep hills, narrow roads, ground that stopped Sherman's cold. Churchill units climbed gradients German commanders had assumed were tank-proof because the machine was built for exactly this: the tank that actually won the war in Europe for Germany. Panzer IV. Every conversation about German armor goes straight to the Tiger or the Panther, but the tank that actually carried the German army from Poland in 1939 to Berlin in 1945 was the Panzer IV, over 8,500 built, more than Tigers and Panthers combined. It started as a close support tank with a short 75mm howitzer, designed to knock out anti-tank guns and infantry positions rather than fight other tanks. Then, in 1942, the long-barreled WW2 fitted to the F2 changed what it was. That gun could kill T-34s and Shermans at combat range, and it was accurate, reliable, and fast to reload. The upgrade path is what makes this tank worth studying. The hull had enough room to take a longer, heavier gun without breaking the drivetrain. The G and H variants added Sherman, the side armor skirts, to stop Soviet anti-tank rifle fire punching through the thinner hull sides. Frontal armor climbed from 30mm on early models to 80mm on the H. Each change fixed a specific problem the battlefield had just handed them, and it showed up. A Tiger I needed roughly 10 hours of maintenance for every hour of combat. The Panzer IV didn't. Crews could fix it in the field with basic tools, and standard rail flat cars could carry it without removing the tracks first. The German units that held the southern shoulder at Kursk weren't in Tigers. They were in Panzer IVs, doing the work quietly while the big cats got the headlines. The tank that keeps getting defended and keeps getting misunderstood, M4 Sherman. German crews called them Tommy Cookers. Allied crews called them Ronsons, after the lighter that lit first time every time. Both nicknames came from the same problem, and that problem was real. But here's what those nicknames don't tell you. The early Sherman burned so badly because of where the propellant charges sat, stuffed into the sponsons along the hull sides, right where incoming rounds hit. When a shell punched through, the propellant caught and the fire reached the ammunition in seconds. The fix was wet stowage, moving the ammo into water-jacketed containers lower in the hull. Shermans with wet stowage caught fire about 10 to 15% of the time after penetration. Without it, that number ran over 60%. That's not a small gap. That's the difference between a crew that walks away and one that doesn't. The 75mm gun couldn't kill a Tiger from the front at combat range, and that's true. But most Sherman engagements in Normandy weren't against Tigers. They were against Panzer IVs, Stug Drays, half-tracks, and soft vehicles. Targets the 75mm handled without much trouble. The Firefly variant with the British 17-pounder could kill a Tiger from the front. The M4A3E8 with the 76mm handled most German armor at medium range, and a knocked-out Sherman could be back in action within 24 to 48 hours. A knocked-out Tiger waited a week for parts. 49,000 Shermans were built. Think about what that means. The legend that couldn't afford to be a legend, Tiger I. January 1943, outside Leningrad, Soviet tankers fired their standard 76mm rounds at a new German tank they'd never seen before, and the rounds didn't penetrate, they bounced. The reports went up the chain. Engineers came out to look at the impact marks, and they confirmed what the crews already knew. The Tiger was real, and the 100mm of vertical steel on its front stopped everything the Soviets had at typical combat ranges. The 88mm KWK-36 gun could kill any Allied or Soviet tank of the period at ranges beyond 1,500 meters, often beyond 2,000. One-on-one, flat ground, competent crew. It was the most dangerous tank on the battlefield. That's not myth. That's the engineering. But it weighed 57 tons, and the final drives, the components transferring power to the tracks, kept breaking under that weight. The transmission needed careful, experienced handling, or it failed. Fuel consumption ran roughly 4 times that of a Panzer IV per kilometer, and the machine needed about 10 hours of maintenance for every hour it actually fought. Germany built 1,347 Tiger Is across the entire war. At Kursk in July 1943, Tiger units lost tanks to mechanical breakdown before they reached Soviet lines. A Tiger sitting dead on an approach march isn't a weapon anymore. It's abandoned equipment. The tactical record was genuinely impressive. The strategic math wasn't. Germany needed far more than 1,347, and that gap is exactly why it doesn't rank higher. The tank that changed what a tank could be, T-34. Summer 1941, and German Panzer III crews are firing their 50mm anti-tank rounds at T-34 hulls and watching them bounce. Not deflect, bounce. The engineers who came out to check the impact marks confirmed it. The T-34's 45mm hull armor was sloped at 60 degrees, and because of the physics of how a round hits angled steel, that slope made it functionally equivalent to about 90mm of vertical plate. The standard German guns of 1941 weren't built for that problem, and the gun on the T-34 could kill any German tank of that period. Wide tracks gave it flotation in mud and snow that narrower German tracks couldn't match. The welded construction, not bolted, meant Soviet factories could build them fast and keep building them. But the early T-34 was a bad place to fight from. The two-man turret forced the commander to load the gun himself, which meant every time he dropped down to grab a shell, he lost track of the battlefield. Radios were often absent on early models, so tank commanders coordinated by flag signal in combat. Soviet crews died because of those flaws at a rate that deserves more attention than it gets. Soviet factories still built 57,000 T-34s across the war. When German guns destroyed 100 in a single engagement, replacements arrived before the week ended. The T-34-85 in 1944 added an 85mm gun and a proper three-man turret, so the tank that had been strategically overwhelming became tactically competitive too. German engineers examined captured T-34s in 1941 and recommended copying the design directly. Germany's leadership rejected it partly because producing the aluminum alloy diesel engine at scale wasn't feasible, and partly because German tank doctrine couldn't accept a machine so openly built for quantity over quality. That rejection cost them the Eastern Front. The masterpiece that arrived too late and broke too often. Panther. Kursk, July 1943. Nearly half the Panthers committed to that offensive never reached Soviet lines, not because enemy guns stopped them, but because their own transmissions overheated, their final drive snapped under the weight, and fuel lines leaked onto hot engine components and caught fire. The factories had shipped them with defects still unresolved because Hitler wanted them at the front faster than the engineers could fix them. Panthers burned before a single Soviet shell came their way. On paper, nothing Germany built came close. The 75mm KWK-42 with its 70 caliber barrel could penetrate a T-34 at over 2,000 meters. And the sloped frontal armor at 80mm and 55 degrees bounced standard Soviet 76mm rounds at most combat ranges. It was faster than the Tiger, better armed than the Panzer IV, and genuinely dangerous to anything it faced when it was running. That last part kept being the problem. The final drives were chronically weak for a 45-ton machine, and that flaw never fully disappeared across any production variant. By 1944, the A and G variants were meaningfully more reliable, and in Normandy, Panthers in hull-down positions caused real problems for Allied armor, but Germany built about 6,000 Panthers total across the whole war, while Soviet factories turned out 57,000 T-34s. By the time the Panther actually worked, the numbers against it were so large that no amount of tactical excellence at the individual tank level could change where the war was going. The factory was the weapon. 10 tanks, 10 different answers, and the one that won wasn't the most powerful or the best protected. It was the one that kept showing up in numbers the enemy couldn't answer. The Panther beat the Sherman in almost every spec on paper. It lost the war it fought. The T-34 had a two-man turret that killed crews and radios that often weren't there. It won the Eastern Front anyway. The Sherman burned when it got hit, then crossed France, Belgium, and Germany in 9 months. If you think a ranking here is wrong, leave it in the comments. We read everyone. Subscribe because the aircraft version of this argument is coming, and the gap between the Spitfire's reputation and what actually won the air war is just as messy as this one.